Thank you. Appreciate this honor and opportunity, and it's nice to be in this setting with some very distinguished panelists that I've managed to gather together here. As Ed mentioned, I've been involved in the Genivi Alliance really since its inception. I was working with Intel Corporation as we formulated the construct that would introduce some of the Silicon Valley thinking, if you will, into the automotive industry through open source software. And certainly we're not claiming that that job would be done by one or even hundreds of individuals, but it will take a huge effort to really fully integrate these different worlds. And one of the things that's been developing in the last 10 years, really during the same time period that Genivi's been forming, is that standards organizations have also recognized how impactful open source software development can be on the movement of new technology into existing legacy industries and in new industries. So today we're going to speak about that topic in the context of Genivi collaborations and open standards in the connected space. And if you were here for the morning session, you learned a little bit about SMART and about cities, and of course all of this has to do with connected. Everyone's excited about the opportunity to connect everything, and it kind of takes a lot of time after a while to figure out all the connections. We need to get this connectivity in the cars to be much simpler, and we think that somehow the standards will help with that. And I wanted to comment too on the positioning, let's say, of Genivi Alliance in the context of standards efforts and collaborations in general. I think that Genivi is distinguished with the ability to not only deal with open source software development. We have some excellent technologists that are creating and merging and validating different open source software packages for the automotive industry. But we make an effort right from the very beginning to collaborate with other collaborations. There's many industry bodies that are either forming what we might call hard standards orgs, as well as other open source development teams and organizations around. So we kind of see these forces coming in from two different directions. My personal experience with the standards organizations comes from working with Open Mobile Alliance. Some people in the audience might know what Open Mobile Alliance is. Has anybody heard of it? Well, you have, because every single connected device in the world uses some of the protocols that were defined by Open Mobile Alliance. It was an alliance that was really created by the wireless telco companies, and they needed to have a consistent way to interface your device, your phone, even before we had the phones we have today, to lock into these very expensive wireless networks that they were building. And that kind of a standards organization didn't use open source software at all. They really had, their fundamentals were built on the concept of very smart people sitting in a room together, hammering out what they expect to be the requirements and publishing a document, and then leaving it up to the industry to build something against that specification. And a lot of times it works, but a lot of times you have to adjust the standard, right? So that's my experience with Open Mobile Alliance, and one of the things that they've been doing in the last year or so is trying to discover whether or not they need to be moving more towards open source processes and methods. And so the panel team that we have here today, I'm going to click the slide forward just to give their names. We don't have any presentation material. I want you to look at the companies and the individuals that you might recognize here on the stage. They're really the pros. And I think it's kind of an interesting and exciting mixture we have with us. We have Ted Gill, who is with W3C. We would consider that to be a standards organization, certainly with some crossover into open source. We have Rudy Strife with Jaguar Land Rover, coming from the open source side of the company. Not necessarily the product developers, software for sure, not a standards organization, no. He's looking at things probably from his point of view is how do we get this code implemented as quickly as possible. We have Stefan Rothgeber. I don't know if I misspelled the name there, but Stefan is with Continental, as many in Germany would say. And this organization, of course, is one of the large tier 1 suppliers to the auto industry, and they follow standards. In fact, Stefan is responsible for Continental's interface into the AUTOSAR Alliance. The AUTOSAR Alliance is something that's very important to the auto industry and has been stable for many years. Everybody applies and adheres to that standard. looking forward to hearing what Stefan has to say about the way AutoSAR is evolving. And then finally, we have Doug Van Dagen's on the line here. He's at the end of the aisle, if you will. Doug is with Ford Motor Company, another car maker. Not quite from the same perspective as Rudy is, though. He's coming from the product side. He's the guy that's responsible for rolling out Ford's connected services, which includes very popular and successful projects like Ford Sync, and now SDL, or Smart Device Link. So, fantastic panel, and I've asked them to submit a couple of suggested questions. So I'm going to start off, if you don't mind, Doug, I'm going to put you up on stage first to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your journey with Genivi. Now, this is something that many in the audience might be aware of, but Smart Device Link was introduced to the open source community through Genivi. Genivi was a mechanism to get that out into the ether, and it was a very exciting time period. I know that if any of you attended that particular all-member meeting, the room was packed. Everybody wanted to see, what is Ford going to give us? Everyone wants to see those contributions. Doug, can you comment a little bit about your journey?
Sure. Okay. So we decided to put SDL or AppLink and Smart Device Link into an open source project in 2014. And we really didn't have a lot of experience, and it took us a couple of years at Ford to convince our management to take what was normally, highly proprietary software, something we had an advantage in the marketplace, out into the open. And the reason we did that is because all the developers wanted a high volume platform. And if you didn't have a high volume platform, you weren't going to be able to compete with the rest of the people in the industry. But really, while we had a couple of people like John Ellis and others who had some experience about putting software in the open, Ford Motor Company didn't have any experience beyond that. And so Genivi was really the perfect place. It had a GitHub repository, it had an existing list of users, it had intellectual property policies on how to contribute code, it had a lot of processes in place where we actually learned from. We learned, I think our tendency was to try and work on the code internally and then get it right and then publish it. And we learned from Genivi that really wasn't the right place to, the right process to go through. It was to, put the code out there in the open and get everybody's comments on the code initially. And really fundamentally it was a group of like-minded people who had great connections into the auto industry, had a lot of experience of putting code into the open, and it was a perfect marriage for us initially. And so we worked through Genivi, worked through the GitHub process, got a lot of great comments, and I think got us off to a really good start with SDL.
Good, great breakthrough, and I think that's, again, an example of how diverse the services, really, of Genivi Alliance are to the industry. It's beyond what we would consider either A standards or an open source community. It's many, many things. Now I'm going to put Rudy on the spot for a second here, because Rudy, I think you were involved, or you were here when that time cycle was happening, right? When SDL was being introduced. Did you have any engagement with that?
Correct, yeah. So at the time, essentially, when SDL was introduced, there was actually a lot of technologies out there where people were talking about how do you connect a smartphone to the vehicle. I mean, Neuralink is going to be one of them, and then of course an Android Auto popped up and Apple CarPlay. And all of these solutions, of course, they have their technical merits and everything, but what counts most for a solution, of course, is the openness, because you need to have the openness for adaptation. For acceptance in the industry, and that's where I am coming from, having been an open source user and being involved in open source for a long time actually in my professional career. I introduced Linux into a commercial product in the late 90s, essentially. It was a capital equipment, a machine, essentially, and at the time people were really looking at open source. Is this really viable? Should we really do this? Isn't that dangerous to do something like that? What happens if this goes away or so? But now in the automotive industry, it's an interesting transformation essentially is happening as particularly OEMs build up their software competencies. They're looking directly at open source and openness and open collaboration to do so. And having worked at the Linux Foundation for 4 years, and promoting the idea and the thought of open source, and if you look around, you know that the most successful companies we have right now across the very different industries are heavily leveraging open source technology and software technologies, and I can only name some of them. Samsung, there is LG certainly, but even Apple is, who is kind of considered a very proprietary software and hardware company, is leveraging a lot of open source technology. If you just look at, if you have an iPhone or so, you look at the legal disclaimers, there's a list, an endless list of open source that they're using and that they're actually also contributing to. And that even includes Microsoft, who actually not too long ago became also a member of the Linux Foundation and actively supporting open source technology. So this is the way to do software.
So I'll summarize that. I'd say that Genivi was sort of on the early side in that context for the automotive industry to accommodate that, and that's one of the reasons that Ford Motor Company chose to use Genivi as a mechanism, if you will, to bring it out to the market. But I want to ask Doug, you know, we're talking about standards here. So one thing is, okay, it's great, open source is fantastic, we love all that. But what is it, the standards part? Now, Doug, I know your organization, you formed a new collaboration, alliance called the SDL Consortium, SDLC, and it's not synchronous data link. What is that? Somebody in the room probably knows what SDLC stands for otherwise, but it's probably not Doug either, because he said he's not the engineer technical guy, he's kind of the business guy. But what is it you're trying to do with SDLC in relation to a standard? Are you trying to get a standard established in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as I said before, volume plays a big part in success in the marketplace. And we are, you know, Ford offers Android Auto and CarPlay. So in a sense, you know, we're competing and yet we're leveraging their product and promoting it. It's really all about the customer. But in terms of the standard, right, from the developer community perspective, SDLC, or AppLink, has the largest developer community in the world with over 120 developers. About 85% of those developers came to AppLink and Smart Device Link first because of the way it was architected. It was architected with developers in mind, people like Pandora, Spotify, Amazon Cloud Player, Wall Street Journal, USA Today. There's a couple of soccer apps for the European group here. But it's really a large developers community, and the reason that it was adopted, even though the UX wasn't so great at first, but now it is with touchscreens, is because of its architecture, and because it can interface with a lot of the applications that are out there seamlessly. And so that gets back to your standards question, right? One of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to have a number of automotive manufacturers, tier ones, and developers contribute to this so that it can be universal. It can be universal both with respect to integration into head units for all different types of OSs, and with respect to integration into the applications themselves. And you know, we've Smart Device Link Consortium was formed in November of last year, November 30th. And since then we've gotten 6 major OEMs, 19 total members, including members like Amazon, Harman, PSA, Toyota, Ford, Suzuki, Subaru, and Mazda. And it really is all about the standards, right? Particularly as the automotive companies move into monetization. If you think about it, you know, everybody's talking about monetization, trying to get into the services business. What that requires is you're going to have to service automotive companies other than yourself. And what that means is you need a standard. You need it to be easy. And so that's one of the frontiers that we're entering into. And as we go into with DSRC and V2V and V2X, that also requires standardization, right? So that the vehicles can talk to each other. So SDLC was founded on a platform that can be used in all OSs and all vehicles and connect to all different types of apps. And you know, we can use standards like the one that Genivi does. You know, the remote vehicle control interaction standard is something that I think we can leverage going forward. So I think as the world becomes bigger and everybody moves into services and monetization and V2V and autonomous vehicle, the number of interactions are only going to increase exponentially, and it's more and more important the more standards we can have. I think the better and more seamless the interfaces are going to be.
Very good. Yeah, Doug, you mentioned something that kind of ties in with the Europe side, and that's where we are, well, we used to be in, but anyway. You mentioned a soccer app, so you're going to be able to play soccer while you're driving your car, or maybe your car's going to drive itself.
Well, Certainly, that would only be appropriate for AV vehicles. But you know, there's an automotive alliance of manufacturers that's working on safety standards as well, right? And that's another thing that people could collaborate on. Is for instance, we talked about how Waze allows you to indicate that you're a passenger, right? And use that functionality, and the same thing is going to be true for autonomous vehicles, right? If we create standards around those interfaces, then I think some of the apps will be more productive and used in the car to a greater degree and safer. But I think the collaboration across these organizations is going to be really critical to that. The Automotive Alliance of Manufacturers is looking specifically at smartphone interfaces, and I think that's another example that will just help the industry move forward.
Yeah. So you're describing so far really some of the fast-moving, let's say Silicon Valley of wherever, Silicon Valley of Birmingham, whatever you want to call it, momentum that happens. Now let's take a little drive into the past though. I'm going to bring Stefan on the stage here because Stefan has been involved in AUTOSAR. Now AUTOSAR has been around a lot longer than Genivi has, or many of these other standards organizations. And one of the things that I learned early on, after coming in from more of the consumer side of the business, and let's say the technology world where everything is meshed together and all the suppliers work with each other. It's kind of a supply chain that is horizontal. But in the automotive industry, traditionally the supply chain is very vertical. Everything happens from the car companies downward. And I think that's where AUTOSAR, Stefan, you and I were talking a little earlier about that, how the leadership of a standards org for automotive, how does it usually work, and how do you see it adapting over this timeline?
Okay, yeah, so first of all, I also have an infotainment background. I used to work 10 years on head units, and so I see the same situation as you do now, coming from that side and now being part of the AUTOSAR development for 2 years now. First, what we have to understand that AUTOSAR is in the market for 10 years, and it's a very stable environment now, especially when you look into Europe, and also if you look into our specification line. So we are at 4.3 now, and actually we are only talking about specification quality increase now, and only a couple of new features coming into AUTOSAR. So it's a very stable environment, and also there's a very stable ecosystem around AUTOSAR, which the OEMs love. Yeah. It's quite interesting when you look about it. There are 7 AUTOSAR implementations you can buy at the moment on such a small market. Yeah? Nevertheless, that's something that the OEMs love, that they can choose from that market and still have this very stable system. Of course, behind AUTOSAR and the products that are related to that, it always comes back to safety. Yeah? So all the safety-related issues are very important for the AUTOSAR environment, and that's actually the reason why nobody thought yet about open source at the moment. Yeah, actually there's a big discussion at the moment if you can ever really combine ISO 26262, which relates to all the safety issues, and open source. Yeah, if it's possible to do both of that, and on the other hand side, we are under the pressure of the new players who don't care about that. Yeah, and will work on that anyway. So I see a big friction at the moment, especially with, on the OEM side, how to handle that in the future. Yeah, to get over that self-made obstacle, actually. Yeah. So coming to the standardization issue, I think here AUTOSAR is a good example, because pretty much every OEM is using AUTOSAR to standardize their own organization at the end of the day, especially when you talk about the global players. And it's the same, of course, for the big tier ones. And here, I think is a real value in AUTOSAR. Yeah, that you can standardize your own organization, that the reuse of the software is something that's coming only now after 10 years. Yeah? And one thing is clear with our new approach for the adaptive platform, which is triggering directly the autonomous driving ECU of the future. Everybody knows that we don't have another 10 years. Yeah, to do this, otherwise we don't need it anymore. We have to be ready by 2020 somewhere, and even that is quite late. Yeah, so that's the reason why even the AUTOSAR partnership now, it took them a long time. It took them over 1 year just to get about the legal issues, opened up a little bit to some kind of let's say closed source approach. Yeah, so we are doing software development too now inside of the partnership. But the real value is still the specification of AUTOSAR. The code is only for reference and for validation. And of course, there are big discussions if we should stay on that level or if we should go the same way as Genivi does. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an experience coming from the other side, if you will, where standards are obviously demanded and need to be very consistent. And that's one of the beautiful things about hard standards is that they last a long time. They last a long time. Now, does anyone in the room use the World Wide Web? Remember, that's what it's called, the www. Oh no, it's called the W3C. That's a standard, and it is the standard that basically opened up everything to this world that we're in. Now, Ted is with us from W3C, which is the standards organization that defines what the World Wide Web is. And it was founded by Tim Berners-Lee, who was the father of the World Wide Web. So tell me, Ted, why are you doing automotive work? What does that have to do with the internet?
That's a very good question because it does seem, makes things a little bit loud, but maybe it's just me. It's a very good question. It's most of what takes place is more embedded. It's ECU, it's Linux. A lot of people build off Linux stack, BSDs. And we're another consortium, and the way we avoided our acronym collision avoidance system was mixing in numbers and having MIT legal register a trademark. Just, suggestion. Genivi and W3C started talking in, I believe it was 2012.
Yeah.
Getting that right. I've been with W3C for a long time, but was not involved in auto then. And Genivi very wisely saw that what they're building is an ecosystem for applications, for running third-party developers to be able to build on top of what they have created, because that provides you content for individual navigation apps like Waze. That's not going to run as a native app necessarily. It'll potentially run as a web application, same with iHeart and Pandora and all the various content people who are already using web technologies. So if you have a ecosystem and you combine that with a web platform that has probably the most developers of any platform on the planet, that provides you, and a ton of existing applications already, that provides you a framework to build upon, and it's going to allow things to open up. We're not quite there yet. We're still trying to lull in the various content providers. There's competing APIs and standards. There's another session about that tomorrow. But I'm pretty sure that we have a good footing, a very good footing because of Genivi's help, relationship with them. And it makes sense. What we're coming up with is APIs for the signals is the primary focus. Media navigation, sort of an abstraction layer to be on top of that. We're also looking at notifications, we're looking at web payments. There's a web payments activity, W3C, that has all the major browser vendors. It has Amex and Alipay and MasterCard, Federal Reserve, World Bank, the list goes on, that have already implementing and shipping this, and now looking at automotive as another place to perhaps bring this abstraction layer for payments as well. So it's mostly an abstraction layer, and we're providing an abstraction layer for vehicles. We provide abstraction layers for a lot of technologies that are on smartphones, like Bluetooth, and list sort of goes on and on. Microphones for WebRTC and cameras and so forth. So it's abstraction layers, and it allows software architecture has evolved based on not recreating things from scratch, but building on top of others. And that's a lot easier if you have abstraction layers and you have a common platform.
So what I remember of this situation with Genivi and W3C working together, there was a couple of automakers within Genivi that basically started out, W3C wanted to innovate it, wanted to know what's going on, how does this work? And I think at that time, it was a lot to do with putting a browser in the car. That concept hasn't really stuck well. It's undermined. People don't realize that there's browser technology somewhere in their software stack. But the mental concept of typing in URLs while you're driving was just too much to handle. And I think a lot of people maybe shied away from the web technologies. But you took a little bit of a turn as you adjusted your focus. And I think that's an interesting thing because you learned, I think, from some of the experiences coming from other industries that you can adjust your standard, right? Can you share anything about that, Ted?
Sure, and a good example is smartphone apps can either be native or they can be web apps. Some of them will look and appear the same, but they're web applications. And you can, I think Event Mobi, what Genivi Amm App is a web application. It's not specific to iOS, it's not specific to Android. So that's a perfect example and very relevant to this audience. So we initially started off in this, I'm more a service-centric guy than a front-end developer. And the initial approach was something to be baked into the browser that can talk to vehicles, a web ideal approach. And I didn't like that approach personally, but that was the direction we were going. Short version of the history is that got debated within W3C as a web of things. Folks were very keen on what we're doing, as cars being a very important thing in the web of things. And sort of a sensors API group that wanted to have us re-represent cars as a collection of sensors. And like, that doesn't work for us. But it made us rethink a service-based approach. And while going back to like the native versus web applications on a smartphone, auto industry is a mix of Qt and HTML5. So if you do a service-based approach, although Qt can also do web ideal and web APIs, it's more platform agnostic, it's more usable by more people, and you can have headless applications like insurance companies who want to monitor driver behavior and run directly on the vehicle.
Okay, so you're taking a different layer of the interface than the traditional, what we would think of as a browser, but you're still using that web interface. And you mentioned one, VSS. So Rudy, I want to ask you if you could just give us a tiny bit of color on that, because as I understand it, VSS is a derivative of the RVI, the Remote Vehicle Interaction Project, that has been hosted here at Genivi for, it's been pretty much its entire life. Can you explain how the one is related to the other and how it relates to the W3C?
Yeah, so well, first of all, VSS is once more a three-letter acronym and stands for Vehicle Signal Specification. Since you're not marketing people, we cannot come up with anything that's more catchy than that, I guess. But
You need some help.
It's a good thing.
well, maybe it's a good thing because we're just saying how it is and what it is. So what it is essentially, so in a vehicle you have hundreds, thousands, up to 1,000 different signals that you get from the various sensors in the signals, as well as signals that initiate actions for actuators. So a signal could be the vehicle speed, or the engine RPM, or the voltage of the battery, or if the windshield wipers are on, or on what stage they are, or how fast they're going. And actuator signals would be lock the door, unlock a door, lower a window, or set it to 50% open, and things like that. Every car manufacturer has those, and typically inside a vehicle, these signals are transmitted or communicated between the various electronic control modules using the CAN bus. So every car manufacturer also has their own CAN bus database describing the signals, so that is proprietary. Now, that model doesn't work if you want to make these signals available to third-party application developers. If you want to give access to third-party application developers so they can actually make use out of these signals and come up with something great new app that runs either inside of the vehicle, in a browser, or in any type of runtime, or even outside of the vehicle, getting information. There's good things you can think about it with. Like mapping gas stations, considering how much fuel is left in a gas tank, or how much battery level, and many other things you can think of. And we want to actually tap into this potential. There's many developers and people out there who have great ideas where they could actually provide some value-added applications for our cars, either inside of the car or outside of the car. So now we have to have but to do this, you have to create a critical mass of people doing this, or critical mass as an industry, essentially. A single car maker, if you couldn't consider, Jaguar Land Rover has sold 500,000 vehicles in the last year, essentially, and this is almost nothing compared to the amount of Android smartphones or even Apple iPhones that are sold. So it's not really interesting for application developers to develop an application for a Jaguar Land Rover vehicle because well, the market is not that large. But if we standardize these vehicle signals, if we give them a naming scheme essentially that then could be used across the industry, and which can be then vehicle manufacturers essentially attach their CAN bus signals to these signal names essentially, then the application developers only have to deal with these standardized names. And so, which means then an application, a web application, could then can run in a Jaguar Land Rover or in a Ford vehicle or any other vehicle that would actually support that, and that is the goal. And this is why we're working with W3C to actually essentially standardize this and make libraries available for web application developers that they can use in their web applications to access vehicle signals. Now, of course, you all have it on your minds. There's a lot of thinking going on in terms of security, who can access what, and so on. Of course, that's part of it. But it's kind of the gist of it.
So a marketing guy, I'm not going to speak as detailed as you did, but what I think what I'm hearing you say is that today, Ford, GM, BMW, they release their information about the vehicle signals to their suppliers as needed, because the suppliers have to have that information. But it highlights one thing that I kind of recognize from a supplier point of view, and I don't get the chance to say this very often because usually we're trying to do business, but we have a love-hate relationship with you guys. We love you because you sell cars and you give us money. We hate you because you make us do things over and over again in different ways for every one of you and your competitors. And I don't think anybody really wants it that way. Even the car makers don't want it that way. So if this spec could become a really solid spec and really well implemented, it would make Doug's job easier, I would think. Would you think that? Oh.
I wanted to add something real quick to Rudy's answer. One of the JLR Champion VSS is basically a data model for all the signals, and then originally it was coming, I believe, out of RVI, and it made a lot. That was at the same time that we were switching from WebIDL to a service-based approach, and it made a lot of sense to have the data model and the specification that describes how to interact with the vehicle be separate, because we know that it's going to change. People are adding LiDAR, they're adding internal-facing cameras so they can tell about driver distraction, what have you. So we know that that data is going to continue to evolve, as far as the number of data points that can be shared with applications.
So the time is now. The time is now.
The structure makes a lot of sense.
Doug, what do you think?
I think you're spot on. And we have challenges not only in terms of aggregating data with other automakers, which I think, Rudy, as you point out, is absolutely critical to competing for some of these services like UBI and geofencing and location-based services with some of the big Silicon Valley firms. We need to aggregate our data as an industry, and I think we can really compete. We can compete for things like high-definition maps. I mean, I think the car park globally is like 88 million cars. So that starts to become on a scale where you can really compete with some of the cell phone manufacturers, et cetera. Vehicles have much more accurate GPS information than phones do. And with the need for high definition maps and autonomous vehicles, I think there's a chance to turn the tables if we act as an industry. But the only way we can do that is with some standards. I'm of the mind that no individual OEM can compete by themselves, really in that arena. But if you think about it, the challenge is also internal. Joel, you're exactly right. Within a simple function like remote start or remote unlock touches 6 modules in the vehicle: PCM, BCM, etc., door body module, right? And we have all different types of legacy modules from different suppliers, because we tend to change suppliers, which I know you hate as well. But it's maddening, right? It's maddening for us because we have to test every single vehicle application, and we're surprised that the data changes and the signals change. on the different modules because frankly the documentation and requirements aren't that clear. So even to launch a Ford or a Lincoln vehicle, we'd appreciate a standard because we can't get, you know, the different suppliers for TCUs to use the same signals. So it would help in our build complexity and it would help in terms of aggregation and help us compete as an industry. So I think it's critical. It'd be great if we could get together on those standards.
I want to give Stefan a chance because we're almost running out of time, but we did talk just a little bit about this earlier. You talked about how the standard of AUTOSAR has actually helped the suppliers to kind of interchange quite well, but not necessarily within the suppliers is it quite so nice. And you're describing a situation that you've experienced too. Stefan, can you comment a little bit more on that? About the standard benefit?
Yeah, so I think the problem that we're facing right now is that a lot of OEMs have their own standards, yeah, and of course the big tier ones then have to adapt to all of them. In other words, they have to make special implementations and again for all of them. So even when you look in AUTOSAR, it's not the same, yeah, so there are special software components required for some of the OEMs that have to be added even into a very stable system, and this always breaks down the components actually, and it creates a lot of extra work. I think at the end of the day, it's a win-win situation if we come to more standards on the OEM side and also on the tier 1 side, just to avoid waste. Yeah, and I think the waste discussion was always in the back, is always about when we are going into quotations and we talk about prices, yeah. But I think what becomes more important in the future is time to market. Yeah, we simply don't have the time anymore to do all those different things for all of you differently. Yeah, and there are not enough software developers in the world anymore left to do this. Because the complexity of each system is going up, and I think that's the major issue, that we work together, or that we die alone actually in the future.
Yeah, so you can drive our supplier pricing even lower if you get the waste out, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to open up the mics on both sides. Both to the panelists and anyone who wants to step forward to one of these standing mics up front. Any other comments about this topic? Someone from the audience here.
So,
can you speak as loud as you can, and we'll...
What kind of time frame are we talking to get all these APIs, if that's what we want to call them?
You're talking about probably the VSS and the W3C and the web APIs, and not necessarily about the SDL.
Question so they can hear it.
Yeah, so Egil asked a question, what kind of time frame are we looking at? And everybody wonders about that because we know, oh, it's not quite done yet. So therefore, what good is it? But you know, we've got two topics kind of put on the table that I would describe as kind of programming interfaces or APIs. One was the SDL and the other was the VSS. And they may or may not be overlapping right now. Maybe they should be. Tell me about the timing. Maybe Ted, can you comment?
People are starting to, you'll see at the demo, hopefully, although I understand it was a hardware issue, some demos of early implementations.
It wouldn't have been our hardware, would it?
No, definitely was not Ren's. So people are starting to prototype and ship. Specifications have different milestones of maturity. And we encourage people to, as part of our process, we encourage people to implement early so that we can find the issues with it and refine the spec. So it's available now.
So the spec is available. It's a question of deployment and implementation, and then finding out exactly how it's going to
Right.
work.
The caveat is there may be some iterations, but they shouldn't be dramatic and drastic.
What about SDL? When is it going to be available?
So it's launched, right? It launched, Ford's using the SDL code. All of the gold members, or excuse me, all the platinum members had announced that they're going to have SDL in the marketplace. So it's coming. As I mentioned, we have 19 members, including people like Harman and Panasonic and Pioneer. See Kyle out there, give you a plug, buddy. And so it's here, right? We have 120 app developers. We announced, or Amazon announced, this part of the SDLC. So the pace is fast for having launched in November. And there will be, we demonstrate every year at Mobile World Congress and CES, more tier 1 head units that have the capability to have SDL. So we're there, it's in production. And we're adding functionality all the time. We demonstrated moving maps. We are working on Bluetooth over iOS and Wi-Fi connections. And so from a competitive perspective, with all the contributions from everybody, we're on a really good pace.
Good. So I'm going to retitle our presentation. This is Automotive Standards at OSS Speeds. And I think that's really what we can learn from the whole interchange that's happening here at Genivi, is that this is a crossing point for many, many different entities that have an interest, whether they're coming from the internet, the web, the car building blocks, AutoSAR, W3C, all these pieces have a touch point with each other in some way. It's a little different touch point than what we get in consumer electronics in general. The automotive industry adopted a lot of things from the consumer business. Let's say Bluetooth. I don't think the automotive industry, well, they might have actually had some input because I know the Jaspar, which is another liaison relationship that Genivi has. They've tried to influence even the Bluetooth SIG to put automotive specific features like multiple phones in the car, that kind of thing. Those things take time though. So we're driving this at open source speeds, and I think it's all positive. It's only been 10 years. There's a lot of forward momentum left in the game. So I want to thank my panelists. Give them a round of applause, please.